Good morning, and welcome to Collaborating with Algorithms. I see we have some folks that are coming in. Come on in, feel free to take a seat. We'll introduce ourselves and then we'll get going. My name is Greg Barber from the Washington Post, and I'll be your moderator today. And joining me.
I'm Martin Beelum. I'm from The Guardian in London. I'm our social and new formats editor.
I'm Nick Diakopoulos. I'm assistant professor at the University of Maryland, College Park. I study computational journalism, algorithmic accountability, automation in the news, and social computing.
My name is Christina Elmar. I'm from Spiegel Online in Hamburg, and I'm head of the data journalism team and also member of the editorial board.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Jackie Marr and I'm at Condé Nast International, where I head up our interactive journalism efforts across 11 markets and multiple titles, including Vogue.
Excellent. And we're here to talk about algorithms and how they can play into journalism. So algorithmic approaches are things that are being talked about a lot when it comes to pretty much everything in our lives these days, right? How computers have changed everything from the way that we light our homes to the way that we get our news. But on the news side of things, algorithms have been an important part of the way that many of us consume our news every day. Everything from Google News to Facebook trends to trends on Twitter. A lot of our news consumption experience has been managed by these programs. And now news organizations are looking at ways to do even more targeted work and work that we manage ourselves using algorithms. And so we wanted to talk a bit about some experiences that we've had, and then talk a little bit more about some of the questions that we've encountered and that one may encounter while working with programs and algorithms. And then we wanted to make sure that everyone here could leave with at least one cool tool from each member of the panel that you could try out yourselves if you wanted to bring algorithms into either your news gathering or your storytelling. And then finally, we wanted to take questions from you. And so we will make sure to leave time for that. But first, let's go ahead and talk a bit about some experiences we've had with algorithms. And we'll start with Martin. And some of the work you guys at The Guardian have done with chatbots.
Yeah, so I've been working on chatbots for, I suppose, 6 months, 9 months. I think they're a really interesting development in the way that people interact with stories. I've been doing, I suppose, digital journalism for, I guess, nearly 2 decades now, which makes me feel very much an old hand at this. And along the way, I've worked on some things that became very important. So the first time you start saying, what does Facebook mean for a news organization? And that becomes something that's quite important. And I've also worked on some things that don't become very important. Google Wave springs to mind, and desktop widgets. And I think I would probably at the minute put chatbots in that latter category, that I don't really see a future where people are very desperate to use chatbots as a way of getting news. But I'm looking at the general trends in computing, and it strikes me at the moment, particularly if you look at how children use technology. So my 4-year-old son has worked out that he can press the green button on the remote control to get the next episode of the program that he's watching, because he's seen his sister do it. He's 4. But I can see it's not that far off that he ought to be able to just shout at the television, put Scooby-Doo on, and it will play it out loud, because that's not a hard phrase to parse, and the program is out there on demand. But I feel like with all these devices like Google Home and Alexa and the voice control on your PlayStation, I genuinely don't think we're that far off just being able to shout at stuff in our houses. And I can envisage a situation where I'll come home and just casually shout, what's the news, or update me on the news. And so the question for an organisation like The Guardian is, what does your news look like in that context? And so the work we've done with our Alexa skill and with chatbots is an attempt to try and understand how we would have to present content in that space, and also how real people who don't work with computers and who don't work in the media will interact with these kinds of conversational interfaces. So a few things that have been fascinating about it. We've done 3 chatbots at The Guardian. The first one was a kind of recipes chatbot where you would say salad and it would bring back some salad recipes for you. Or you could just ask it, what do you suggest for dinner tonight? And it would just bring back some recipe suggestions. And how we first tested it actually was we didn't even build a bot. We just told some people that we'd built a bot, and just to see what they would ask it. And then we had the developers, Wizard of Oz style, pretending to be robots to answer it, so that we could kind of get an idea of what the script might be. And then now one of the most interesting things is that people really do chat to them as if they're living sentient beings. And the technology is nowhere near ready for that. So the experience can be quite unsatisfying, I think, if you're a user. And so then we made a second bot that basically, I think what news organisations often do is go, here's a new technology, here's the 500 articles a day that we're already publishing, how do we shove these articles through this new technology? And so we have a morning briefing bot, which you can subscribe to alerts, and it will basically message you on Facebook at 6 o'clock in the morning with, here's a selection of the news, or here's the top stories today. And it acts like a push notification, and we feel that that kind of gives us a regular presence on someone's phone. We've built up a reasonably small subscriber base for it. We know that they open the messages a lot, but the click-through rate isn't high. But we suspect, my hunch is that basically people get the message, and most people in Europe asleep within a meter of their phone. So you're in bed and you pick it up, and it gives you a carousel of links, and you can kind of scroll and feel caught up for the day. You know that war hasn't broken out or whatever, and go about your daily business, and then maybe catch up with the news a bit later. And for a while we were also experimenting with writing those alerts specifically in the morning, which actually meant me having to get up at 5 o'clock every morning, which was suboptimal from a product design point of view. But also the thing that you could do is, like, obviously the chatbot just basically has a list of good morning, hi type messages. But on the day after the US election, I made it so that it just said it's Trump. And that's the message that you get in the morning. And so that's the thing that I hope will come out of all these discussions, is that you can be a bit, oh God, these are robots and they're going to take all our journalism jobs, and that, there are plenty of people who are paranoid about that. But still, a lot of these algorithms and computers are assisting you making editorial decisions. So that it may have come from a chatbot, but it's an entirely editorial decision by me that's the kind of seemed like the appropriate way for The Guardian to wake people up in the morning with that alert. And I've also been working on another bot, which we've done a little bit of testing with, and I haven't released yet. But we were looking around, how do you write something that's more editorial in this space? And so I've picked, obviously the UK at the moment is entirely obsessed with the subject of Brexit. So I've written a bot that kind of, the idea being, it will answer some of the questions that people ask. And again, I did some quite low-tech testing. So I put a Google form up and asked people, if there was one question you could ask a news organisation about Brexit, what would it be? And so in that way, I collected a load of questions. So I had a list of the topics that people were interested in and the exact phrasing of how people, something like Article 50, there's quite a few ways you can phrase the question. And so I've then used the Dexter platform I suppose the script's about 4,500 words now. And the theory is that if you ask about Gibraltar or you ask about a thing, it will most of the time return some useful information or an opinion piece, or if you ask about the value of the pound, it will give you a graphic of how the currency has been tanked over the last year. And sometimes it will tell jokes, with the idea that occasionally the user who gets the joke receives a joke will think it's really funny. So sometimes if it doesn't understand what's been said, sometimes it just has a kind of cartoon shrug that comes back. and the idea being that people will screenshot that and share it, and that will become a discovery mechanism for the bot. Because I think another thing we've established is that it's very hard to get people to discover that you have messenger bots, and it's also very hard to quite quickly convey to the user what you can actually do with them. So, I mean, I think that's probably it. We'll talk more about. There's all sorts of interesting ethics around it and the use of algorithms in general in the news. But as I say, I think it's an interesting space, not because I think everyone will be using chatbots for news, but because I think news organisations need to understand how that kind of conversational interface is going to develop over the next few years.
Sounds great. Thanks, Martin. And speaking of chatbots for news, Jackie, I know at Condé Nast you guys have been developing chatbots of your own too, yeah?
Yeah, we recently, so Condé Nast, like I said before, we're a publisher of several magazines, including Vogue and other fashion-focused ones like GQ. I'm on a new team that is tasked with coming up with a global strategy and also a global strategy around how we publish and what our processes are and what sort of new experiences we can offer our readers. So along the way, while we're rolling out common platforms that will make our editorial processes easier, we were looking at some of the ways that we could actually provide some new experiences and allow our audience to interact with us. So chatbots are, we discovered that chatbots are a relatively straightforward way for us to at least get started on that. Although, as Martin pointed out, they do have their share of challenges. In February, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with how the fashion world works, but there are 4 major fashion weeks that happen in New York, London, Milan, and Paris. And they happen in February and September. So for this past round of major fashion weeks, we were contemplating what could we do that would allow our audience to get a more tailored, somewhat personalized view of our coverage around these fashion weeks. So we created a Facebook Messenger bot for British Vogue. And what we wanted the bot to do is to let people follow their favorite designers. So you could tell the bot, let me know whenever you publish something about Chanel or Gucci. And doing that required us to, first of all, know what all of the names of all of the designers were, which seems relatively obvious. And you would think that Vogue, of all places, would have that sort of database. It did in some ways, but it wasn't something that we could use to search. So we constructed a database of all the designer names. And so then if someone interacted with the bot and said anything, including the name of some known designer, we would then sign them up to get a notification. But what we didn't anticipate, and I feel like Martin was touching on this a bit when he said that people will kind of talk to the bot as if it's a human being on the other side. We didn't anticipate things like delivering some article or runway show coverage about a designer and having the person say thank you. And initially, when we rolled out this chatbot, if it didn't understand something that the person said, it would say, I'm sorry, I don't understand that, or I don't recognize that. And there's all of these people saying, thank you very much, or hi, or good morning, good evening. And the bot's saying, I don't know what to do with that. And it also got a fair amount, well, more than 0 marriage proposals as well. But if someone is saying thank you, I mean that's actually pretty nice. That they're thanking this little chatbot for sending them an article, right? So one thing, my biggest takeaway from that experience is that you should, when you're doing something like that, you should build it in a way, whether you're using a platform like Dexter that Martin mentioned, or you're building it yourself, do it in a way that you have some kind of view on how people are interacting with it, and that it's flexible enough that you can respond in real time or near real time to different behaviors and how people are using it. Aside from chatbots, though, So I mentioned that my team is tasked with coming up with this global strategy, and that's a global strategy that is with a company that's been around a long time. Vogue, the first Vogue was published in 1892. So we have a pretty massive archive, and it's not just a massive archive of text, it's primarily a massive archive of photography and more recently video. So how do you get a handle on what's in that archive? And going forward, how do you understand what 11 different markets, at least the ones that we fully own, there's about 20 in total. How do you get a handle on what they're doing and what Japan is covering compared to Mexico? There are ways that you can use algorithms to, I guess content discovery would be a way of putting it. Everything around, for text, there's natural language processing that you could do, topic analysis. But then, interestingly, around images, there's something called computer vision and a suite of libraries and open source tools that we'll get into maybe a little later. Are there ways that you can use algorithms to detect objects and images, dominant colors in the fashion world? It could be interesting to see like the use of the color black. It's black the new black this season. Yeah, so.
Excellent, thanks. And speaking of developing for your own website, Christina, I know your team has been working on some interesting ways to tell stories based on data and algorithms. And actually, if we could see the slides, boom, there we go. I can actually show you a little bit of what that looks like, the work that your team's done.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, first of all, I have to say that we don't have this super large IT department and many people who could work on us within our really old CMS. So we try to develop a small and smart things within our data journalism team. And this is one project that we have developed together with our sports department. Basically, there are two projects. The first is based on the official data feed of the German Bundesliga and of every match also in the Champions League. We just try to calculate algorithm-based scores for every player. That should be faster and should be more objective than other scores that we see on the market. And we are taking into consideration, I think, 50 factors and are weighting them according to the position of the player and are aggregating them so that in the end you get an article every Monday that really shows you the scores for every player. And we in the data team do not need to work on this topic ever again because it runs, right? This is the perfect system then. And the other one is that what you see right behind me. These are tactics boards developed by a colleague of mine who is really into football analytics and football graphics and who was always missing some really meaningful way to display these data sets in one picture. And then he saw some kind of a visualization like that somewhere on the web and decided to invent them for our website. And then, we developed somehow an interface for our colleagues in the sports department in which they can really push some buttons and then have a code snippet to put into our CMS and to publish those boards. Probably I should just tell you what they show. They give you for every match, for every player, the number of ball contacts that this player had within his own team, and the arrows show the connections between the two players or between all of the players, so that people who understand football can then read the game with one picture. And in this project, it was really important to also include the colleagues in the sports department in the design process and also in the process of publishing those boards, because now they feel that it's also their project. They are proud of it. They really support it every week, and thus every weekend we have such an infographics combo on our website in the upper section. And this won't be possible without them being on board of this project. Yeah, and thus I think this could be a way to just implement those techniques into a newsroom without really, having to set up a great IT project for this. Yeah.
Thanks. And then, Nick, you've been looking overall at, well, that slide went away. But you've been looking overall at some of the work that Google has been doing, especially regarding the presidential election in the U.S., right?
That's right. Yeah. I've been looking broadly at computational journalism and algorithmic accountability for a few years now. And in the 2016 U.S. election, we started to get very interested in the role that platform algorithms were playing in terms of the news and information that people were finding about the presidential candidates. So we started gathering data on Google in particular running up to the election, trying to see what types of pages were popping up when you search for candidates, what types of news articles were being surfaced. At the top of a search result page, you have a little box that says in the news, and there's sort of 3 news articles that are highlighted at the top of the page, and presumably those get a lot of traffic because it's such privileged screen real estate. And all this was kind of motivated by some academic research from 2015, which had suggested that actually, if search results are very pro one candidate on the first page, that you can actually sort of influence their perception of that candidate in a positive way, and that undecided voters might then be more likely to vote for that candidate. So because this had been sort of academic laboratory research, we wanted to see whether or not we were actually finding those patterns on the real Google search engine. And so I would invite you to Google our articles on this. They were published in Slate. If you type in my last name in Slate, you'll probably find them. End of the day, though, I mean, we saw some interesting patterns. Things like the New York Times and CNN dominated close to 50% of those top in the news links when you Googled for candidates' names. Now, does that mean that the New York Times and CNN were the best at SEO? Have they learned to play the search engine game better than other news outlets? Or are there other features that Google is picking up on from those articles that privileges those articles? But we're sort of approaching it from a media diversity point of view. Is it, what do we expect from the search engine algorithm in terms of what it presents to us? And is the distribution of sources fair in terms of different types of content that we encounter? Of course, Facebook is the other important algorithm in this domain. I pulled a recent statistic that Facebook and Google drive about 80% of traffic to news sites. Maybe some of you are seeing that in terms of your analytics. I know there's some differences in different parts of the world. In the U.S., about 62% of people get news from social media. And so, I mean, this is sort of, I think, the next important platform for us to start investigating and looking into how are algorithms on the big social media platforms mediating attention to election information to candidates. There were some stories about fake news in the 2016 U.S. elections. Stories about Facebook trends sort of perhaps having political bias. So being able to track these types of biases that we're seeing emerge on platforms is, I think, is of great interest. And even just kind of understanding, what does Facebook privilege in their news feed? A few years ago, they turned up the importance of video in the news feed, and you can actually see that reflected in data that people have been collecting. You can see that that videos got more attention after that algorithm change. Even subtle things like Facebook, Facebook occasionally blogs about changes that they're making to their news feed. Occasionally they'll come out. I think at one point last year they came out and said, we're going to start slightly privileging posts on Facebook that get more discussion, more commentary. Well, that's interesting, and it's interesting that they want to privilege conversational content. But actually, from a news point of view, there's also very important stories or very important information that people may very well read, but not want to talk about because of social protocol or awkwardness in discussing this in public online, but where there would actually be some news value and some information value for people to get that information. So there can be sort of subtle implications of every little algorithmic shift in the news feed and what it privileges versus, well, what does that mean in terms of the type of information that people are able to find? So these are the broad types of questions that my lab at the University of Maryland is interested in researching.
Well, and that broad question brings us to our part of the program where we tackle broad questions. So let me pivot that one to you guys in the group. What do you think is the responsibility of organizations like Facebook or Google or what have you to create a distribution of sources when it comes to their algorithmic storytelling? Is it fair for us as news organizations to expect them to help diversify, to sort of choose news from different places and present it? Or is it really kind of up to us to play the SEO game, as it were, and kind of fight in the arena for space and for dominance?
I think it should be something in between. We should be at least be able to read or to know what their algorithms really, what they prefer. If they perhaps prefer videos or conversations, often we really get into this by reverse engineering Google or Facebook. This can't be the way to work in this environment where for example, we have 30% of our traffic that comes via Google and search engines. So this is really relevant, and given that we don't have this huge IT department, as I mentioned before, you really often have to do projects about this, and you would like to use your capacities otherwise. So.
I have a slightly contrarian view that I think that we often end up looking at this issue from the perspective of being a news organization, and we don't look at it from the perspective of the end user. And so there's nobody more frustrated in the world than social media managers who can't get their content in front of people because that's their job. But if you think about when you pick up your phone and you check into Facebook, you want to see what your friends are doing. You're not there because you want to engage with brands. And if you're checking the news, you would go to a news app or a news site. And so I feel that what we have to be conscious of is that when we're publishing into those spaces, we need to think about whether that content really belongs in that space and earns its place in that space. So, I mean, the slightly optimistic thing I take on that is I look at every time we publish something on Facebook, it's like a series of little A/B tests. Facebook will show it to a few people who've liked the Guardian's page, and if those people like and share and interact with that story, then it will progressively show it to more people and to more people. And so, therefore, in theory, that means only your best and most interesting content gets shown to a very wide audience, which means basically everyone thinks you're great, because if you publish rubbish things that nobody interacts with, that stuff doesn't travel on social media. And so I think, there's an element where pieces get the audience they deserve, and that the time that you might spend crafting the sell of something on social media, actually, if you put that extra bit of effort into crafting headlines and crafting stand first, which are all, again, human editorial decisions, then those will have a big impact on how that is received in the broader sphere. But I think that that's also a slightly naive editorial approach, and I think the kind of regulatory framework issue around content discovery and impartiality is actually a bigger question for, I think, both the tech industry, the news industry, and I think it's quite interesting as well that, so for example, with the EU referendum, if you look at the data, the most shared story in the referendum campaign was a story from the Daily Express, which is a national newspaper, that basically staying in the EU would lead to the dismantling of Britain's National Health Service, which is quite an obtuse way of interpreting how EU regulation was going to impact on hospitals in the UK. But that was the most shared thing. I don't think anybody would have said that the Daily Express was the most influential newspaper in the UK. I don't think anybody would say that that was the most important story of the referendum. But the data shows that that was the story that was most read on Facebook in the weeks leading up to the referendum. And I think it's hard to say that those things are not going to have an impact on the audience, given that people spend so much time and money on advertising and promoting political viewpoints. To think that those algorithms aren't having an impact on public opinion, I think there must be, and I think it is something that the companies do need to be more transparent about how they work.
Pieces get the audience they deserve. Any reactions to that idea?
That pieces get the audiences that they deserve.
Yeah.
Well, I think while it's important for social media and other platforms to have a certain amount of transparency about how their algorithms and systems work, I think it's also important for us in the media to understand why why do people go to Facebook, or the geographic differences when you go around the world. So where, in China, like, people do not use Facebook because it's blocked, right? So what are people using there? A lot of them use WeChat. We've seen that from our referral traffic, at least like in Japan, close to half of our referral traffic is coming from a platform called Line, which is similar to WhatsApp and other messaging apps. It's just a regional difference. As far as getting the audience that a story deserves, I think when we look at these platforms, we should, when we're thinking about doing storytelling on them, like, it's one thing to take a feed of your articles, like an RSS feed or something, and just kind of send out links, just like you would in the feed via the platform. But I think it gets more interesting and perhaps gets more to the audience that a story deserves when we leverage what the features are of each of those platforms, and actually, like, do our storytelling in a way that that a messaging, sort of like interactive conversational interface allows us to do. Which is different than how you would approach writing a straight up article, like with a headline, byline, and a few paragraphs, maybe an image here or there, for print or digital. There have been people and organizations who have done things like recreating the conversations in the Churchill war rooms during World War I, like via Twitter or even like a messaging app. And that's something that you couldn't do in a more straightforward article presentation, right?
So I might jump in here too. I'm not sure I agree that articles get the audience that they deserve. I mean, the content itself, the actual thing that the user experiences is just one piece of the deciding factor of the entire audience that emerges for that content. I mean, I think the algorithm does play a role. I mean, heck, if your article gets featured as one of those top links on Google, that could drive tens, hundreds of thousands of visitors to that article. And then, what's the follow-on traffic from that? I mean, of those 100,000, some fraction will post it to social media. So did that article deserve to have that audience? I don't know. Google thought it did. But it wasn't necessarily inherent to the content itself. And then you have signals coming off of the content on social media. So, if you post your content early in the morning, who is the audience that's logged in looking at that content early in the morning? And if Facebook is paying close attention to the signals, like who's commenting, who's liking, who's responding, it's just picking up those sort of data signals from that early morning audience. So again, if that article dies down and dies off, did the article deserve to die off, or was it just sort of this complex interaction between what the algorithm thought of the audience at that particular moment when it became published? So yeah, I don't know. I would be careful about pinning it to the content so closely, and I guess I think it's important to consider these broader factors that influence popularity.
And so collaborating with algorithms, getting back to the title, often means collaborating with organizations like Facebook or Google or what have you. A couple of the items discussed here were chatbots on Facebook Messenger. What are some of the what are some of the things that you've learned, the folks on the panel who have done this, about the process of creating software that then is deployed on a platform that's not your own? And the kind of level of control, I guess, that we have to give up when we do that. But I would suppose there are benefits to that too.
So it's a very lengthy and frustrating process, and I have this very old-fashioned analogy for it. But basically, when we only had print products, you never woke up on Monday morning to a blog post from newsagents saying, "Oh, we only stock triangle-shaped newspapers now," and you just have to print them in a different shape. And we've just done the change now. And so anyway, you can draw your own conclusions about how easy it is sometimes to deal with massive tech companies who, I think it was it the Washington Post who had a messenger bot that came out on the day that Facebook announced that they'd opened up chatbots on the platform, and the unsubscribe function didn't work on it. And I was going to write, a really scathing blog post about how poor it was that I'd basically tried this thing and couldn't unsubscribe from it. And then I just suddenly remembered that there was a poor developer there who had told his product manager the unsubscribe function doesn't work, and the product manager just basically went, "Facebook said we're shipping on Tuesday," and that's it, and it goes live, and you try and fix the problem. So in one sense, it's really interesting because these companies will sometimes come to you with like, "We're thinking of doing this with our product. How can you see using that? Do you want to be a launch partner with it?" And you will do some work on it, and that's a really interesting and can be a very rewarding partnership. At other times, you also know that you will end up investing in things that then that company or platform will just basically lose interest in, or it will turn out not to be a success for their users, and you've actually shifted a portion of your newsroom to doing things. I think a classic example of this actually is I accepted the job at The Guardian that I've got now, just before Christmas, with a start on February the 1st. And during January, Facebook announced live video, and on February the 1st, everyone says, "So what's your strategy going to be for live video?" And it's kind of like, I don't know, because when I said yes to the job at Christmas, video wasn't even part of my plans at all. And so in that sense, you can feel that you're being pushed around and buffeted a bit by these organizations. I think where we do have partnerships with them, sometimes it has worked very, very well. I worked with Facebook on an app where we actually went out and worked in Menlo Park for a week with some of their developers and product people, and that was fantastic. And we rented a little space, so we really had like a little startup mentality, and it was really interesting to get a taste of that culture and see how that works. And so those things I think can be very fruitful. But I also think there's something that I think Facebook in particular has got itself into a situation where it kind of doesn't want to be seen as a publisher with the editorial responsibilities for being a publisher. Emily Bell, who used to work at The Guardian, has written about this actually quite recently, in that these businesses don't want to accept the kind of editorial and legal responsibility for being a publisher, but effectively they are publishers. And I think there's actually a lot they could probably learn on the editorial side of the industry that would be beneficial to them. I have been in conversations with people, and they're talking about the way that user-generated content is being gathered from like conflict zones or places like that, and I kind of immediately you feel you have a duty of care to your audience about how you're gathering that content and redisplaying it, that an editorial sensibility would flag up as being a really important issue, and that maybe that's not quite there in some of the Silicon Valley companies. Anyway, sorry, that was probably a lot of that, not reflecting the official position of The Guardian. I could probably say that was my answer there.
Jackie, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, just about things to keep in mind when you're working with these different platforms. As far as like Facebook Messenger goes, we launched our chatbot around the Fashion Weeks in February, and then in March, I think it was March 4th or something, Facebook announced that they had a bunch of new features for their chatbot series of APIs, and one of the features involved having a multi-level menu, right? So when you're in Messenger on Facebook, there's like, some people call it the hamburger menu, right? The 3 lines, horizontal lines. What was possible when we launched and when we created the bot was just like, I think a max of 3 or 4 different items that you could offer people. They changed that to allow you to have submenus and stuff, and we were like, oh, that would be really cool, like if we were able to do that, because then we could have categorized our content a little better. But one of the other features that they announced was the ability, and this might sound a little strange that I'm going to say this, but the ability to turn off free text, so allowing people who are chatting with your bot to actually just type in whatever, and that was very interesting. And I wish that we were able to actually take advantage of that, because it's difficult to write a chatbot, and I think the technology isn't really there yet, unfortunately, that can understand anything a human being might want to type. And so, like I mentioned earlier, that people were saying thank you to our bot, and the bot was going, huh? Like what? And that was kind of unfortunate. We were able to respond and adjust how our bot was interacting with people when they said thank you, and the bot would started to say you're welcome. But if we were able to just offer a series of buttons, like a more structured, guided sort of conversation, instead of trying to anticipate and respond to anything someone said in English or otherwise, that would have been, I think that would have saved us some time and perhaps offered a better experience to our audience.
I think one of the things that we learned as well with the chatbot, just in that terms of being able to react to things, is that very occasionally I'll get an angry email from our reader's editor about some very unhappy user who has basically decided that Facebook Messenger was the right avenue to make an editorial complaint about something that's really serious. And so they would send to Messenger like 800, 1,000 word screed about why we have done something wrong. And the bot would then say, hi, how can I help you? I'm a friendly bot. And that went down even worse. And so we've actually built into the bot now that if it detects someone sent it more than like 200 words or something, it just assumes it's a complaint and says you want to go and speak to the reader's editor. But it's those kind of things. I would never have thought to put that in the product before it started. And again, I think that's again a broad theme of this is that the way we're using algorithms or having to respond to algorithms is an always moving target, because people will release new features, because users will change their behavior, because they get more used to things. If you think about how search engines have changed over the years, because people, it took a long time for basically human beings on the internet to get trained to use search engines properly. Mm-hmm. And so I think we're going through that process with social media, and I think, again, looking at the display, how things are displayed algorithmically, I think we also have to be careful that a lot of people in the media would basically consider them, or they might not consider themselves, but would basically be power users of these tools. So your perception, journalists check Twitter every 5 minutes. I don't think that's the regular usage pattern of people. So that while you were away showing you 4 popular tweets is like really annoying to people who are on Twitter all the time, because they're like, just show me the latest things, just show me the latest thing. But actually, if you only look at it twice a day, then just seeing 4 things that were quite funny and good is a much, much better user experience. And I think we just also have to be aware that we look at the media and media consumption in a different way to the way that users do.
Yeah. Well, and thinking about user experience too, when you're working with external platforms is important, but also when you're working internally. Christina, when you were looking to put together the interactive you showed us and some of the other work that your data team does, what's some of the thinking that you do around the user experience and designing for users?
Yeah, and concerning the platforms, or
Actually, I guess I could ask that question for external or internal users. Let's talk about internal users, though, since we're talking about collaborating with algorithms. How do you design for your staff members to be able to use the interactives that you design, to be able to put new information in there?
we just design with them, yeah, get them into the process and just do a little bit of design thinking with them, so that they can really say, okay, oh, we need those buttons, and those would be too complicated. But we also want to have them engaged into the process, so there have to be some decisions that they have to make. Yeah, now they got some training and they're on board now. But concerning the platforms, one thing that came into my mind also was yeah, regarding general articles. Our storytelling ways, how we tell stories, are really changing, also dependent on which kind of formats of or graphics or interactive features can be displayed on the platforms in instant articles or Google AMP, for example. So if we have some formats that we like to do a storytelling through, like starting with the text and then going into the interactive graphics and then ending with the text, and we can't display the graphics on these platforms, we have to do it in a double way. And this is basically not the way we want to tell stories, but as long as we do not really have everything integrated, we can't do otherwise. So this is sometimes a little bit frustrating.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and so one more topic I wanted to make sure we had time to get to was thinking about these experiences as unique experiences in and of themselves. So, you know, not basically taking a newspaper story and reading it on the radio, but thinking about how one could tell a radio story, because a radio story is something different from a newspaper story. When we're thinking about algorithmic experiences, whether it's chatbots or audio experiences with something like Alexa or Google Home. I think, Martin, you put it as, you know, sort of just jamming an article into a space that's new. When you're thinking about that, anyone on the panel, how have you, I guess, so far thought about these experiences as unique storytelling opportunities? And if you could maybe share some thoughts or learnings that you've had in creating these experiences, what's gone well, maybe what hasn't.
Just one quick thing. We're looking at ways of building things for platforms like Amazon's Alexa, which is the technology behind the Echo, and Google Home. Like I mentioned that we have a highly visual archive. How does that translate to audio, sort of conversational interface? One of the ways that I've been thinking about it is like, well, I wake up in the morning and this morning I was like, what am I going to wear? I have to be on this panel. Like, I don't know. Like if I had the over 100-year knowledge and reference of something like Vogue, and could afford the clothes that are in it, perhaps I would just say, what should I wear today? And that invites a host of other questions, such as like how would I know, or how would Vogue know what my personal preference is, or would it care, or should it care? So there are ways of thinking about it, like beyond just having it like recite a list of designer names or something like that, that could actually leverage like the features of the platform.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's really a unique set of design affordances for building not only conversational interfaces, but interfaces that in some way incorporate some, I hesitate to say artificial intelligence, some kind of behavior that looks like it could be intelligent. And I think we're actually still in the early phases of figuring out what those experiences should look like and what are compelling experiences. And certainly for our particular domain, what are compelling experiences for news. Mm-hmm. And so, perhaps somewhat different than the other panelists, as an academic, I'm unencumbered by legacy content archives and so on. And so, with my students, I sort of challenge them to brainstorm. What are the possibilities of what we can build with Twitter bots? What could we do? What kinds of conversations could we have? How might we impact fake news in some way? And then of course I had to clarify and say, I don't mean to make fake news worse with bots. Please, let's do something constructive with bots in terms of fake news. But just sort of challenging people to be creative, to think about combining the capabilities of automated interaction, of reaction, of bridging different forms of content databases into new platforms and so on. And a lot of it does actually also come down to what are the capabilities of the platform itself that you're designing for. And it can be difficult to kind of abstract that away into, well, okay, here's my idea for a bot, and this is what the bot is going to look like on Slack, and this is what the bot is going to look like on Amazon, and this is what the bot is going to look like on my website. So, and each of those outputs could shape your bot in important different ways.
Yeah, I think one of the things with bots as well is that the cross-platform capabilities are so different at the minute. I remember actually back in the early 2000s when interactive TV was first getting going, and in the UK, basically you could do interactive TV across 3 different platforms, and they all had completely different abilities, and so it was just so hard to even come up with a concept that would work across all 3. I think one of the things that I think is an amazing thing about doing digital journalism on the internet is the two-way interaction with the audience, which is unique to the platform. It's also really hard to do it because you kind of want to do it in a totally different way for each story. So it's easy to make a CMS where you can hammer out 800-word articles. It's hard to make a framework where you can do one-off storytelling. And so from before, when I was at The Guardian, I was at a company called Trinity Mirror for a while, and we did a couple of little startups. And so we had some, I thought, really great different ways of doing storytelling. At a point where it looked like Western forces might bomb Syria, we did a game called Where's Damascus? And so basically you had a completely unmarked map of the globe, and you had to tap where you thought Damascus was, and then it showed a heat map of where the last 500 guesses had been and told you like how accurate you were relative to that, making the basic point that everyone on that day had an opinion about whether the UK and the US should be bombing Syria, and most people literally couldn't point to it on a map. And then we were slightly naughty, and we filtered through the guesses to find ones that had come from the IP addresses of the Houses of Parliament in the UK. So then got a news story out of MPs don't even know where it is that they're going to discuss bombing. So that again, that's a way of addressing that issue and telling that story that you could not do without an interactive thing, but also you can't use it next week. It's like it's a one-off thing. You know, we also did. There was a story in the UK that all police officers were going to get some training on how to deal with domestic violence cases, and it was going to be a multiple-choice training exercise, which people were horrified with. And so we actually did the story as a multiple-choice exercise. So it basically, the opening paragraph was all police are going to be changed on domestic violence. Will it be 1, face-to-face sessions, 2, blah, blah. And so then you told the story in the medium, and that felt really right. But again, that was like the story comes in, you've got to have the technology in the place to deliver that story that's still timely when it's on the news agenda. And so you really need a close collaboration of developers and designers and journalists in the room, and not every newsroom is set up to do that. And also, if you've got a unit like that, some days there's just no stories where you have an idea for something for, and you've got 3 people sitting in the newsroom going, don't know what we're going to do today. And so that also is, you know, gives a sustainability problem for these things. And I think the other thing, sorry, I feel like I'm hogging the panel and just rambling, but I'll carry on. I have lots of ideas for how The Guardian could do chatbots. It's kind of really difficult as a big international global news brand to just dip your toe in the water and do something. So I like Poncho, the weather chatbot, and it's like, what did they start off with? Nobody knows our name. We've invented a cartoon cat. It does the weather and it does jokes. It's great, but you kind of, even though The Guardian publishes a breadth of stuff from the very most serious stuff that it has on the front page of the print edition to the funny, frivolous stuff it has in the weekend magazine, which is great and entertaining, where do you position a chatbot? I have this idea for a bot that just basically detects the first time Donald Trump tweets in the morning, right? Because he always does, doesn't he? He wakes up and immediately starts tweeting. So it would just message you, oh, he's up. And then about like 10 minutes later would then just give you a score of looking at the tweets. like how likely he was to have started a war this morning, and that's it. But you couldn't do that as the Guardian Donald Trump bot, because that would be like a thing in a statement. I suppose I could do it myself in my spare time, but there's that question with the ideas you have when you are working with a big brand and a new platform. Where do they fall in the uncanny valley of this is representing your news organization, and this is just a really interesting idea that we thought would be fun and something to try out?
Yeah, lots of questions for us going forward. So we want to get to your questions in a moment, but first to the panel. We promised to have at least one cool tool per member of the panel. Let's try and see if we can make this a lightning round, about a minute each, just to talk through something, one from each of you, that anybody in the audience could go take a look at as far as either computer-assisted news gathering, storytelling, what have you. We'll start with Jackie down at the end.
Sure. So I mentioned doing image analysis with algorithms, and when I was looking, there's a suite of libraries called computer vision that are really interesting and powerful for object detection and color detection. But as far as something that a novice could use or someone who hasn't done it before, I've found some JavaScript-based image analysis libraries. There's one in particular called Color Thief. And I like Color Thief because it's open source and you can use it. You can import the JavaScript library yourself in your own application. But it's also hosted, so you can just drag and drop an image, one or more images, and it will tell you what the dominant colors are and a few other things as well. And it's very easy to use. So that would be my recommendation.
Excellent, thank you.
I like to point out the idea to collect user feedback in a structured way. This can be done via Google Form, via Playbuzz, via quiz tools, other tools, and to give them feedback about what other users have responded in a direct way. We've done this, for example, in a questionnaire, in a map-based questionnaire about how do our readers evaluate road construction projects in Germany, really costly projects, and most of them said, even the ones who did not really use the roads, oh, I think this could be really necessary. So the discussion was a slightly different one compared to our forums, for example. And yeah, this should be done as often as possible, I think.
Excellent. I'll actually jump in since I have the opportunity and say an extra cool tool. So hey, this is a freebie from a group called the Coral Project, which I just happened to be part of and just happened to have a session that I'm doing on Saturday to talk about. We have there's a plug. We have a tool called Ask. It's free for any news organization that wants it. It's open source software, and it's exactly the kind of tool that Christina just talked about. You can create forms, embed them on your site, get information in from users, and then display that information right back out on your site. You can go to coralproject.net to find out more about that. And now back to our show, Nick.
Welcome.
Wow, okay. So one tool that I could sort of suggest if you're just getting into the world of bot making is IBM has a tool, IBM Conversations, and it's sort of got all of the fancy stuff that IBM does with cognitive computing, artificial intelligence. Watson, yeah. With an okay user interface that kind of helps you author dialogue trees, so you can think about, well, if the user asks this question, how would the bot respond? Okay, well, then you can add kind of trees, structures, like if this happens, then that happens type of thing. So that could be something to check out. And then just a quick add-on to that, if you're looking for a community of bot builders, there's botmakers.slack.com. It seems to be pretty active, and there's channels there where people are brainstorming ideas. So you might go there to prime the pump.
Terrific, Martin.
Yeah, so there's a chatbot platform called Dexter, which is at rundexter.com. What I like about that is it is very, very simple syntax, so you don't really have to have ever understood any kind of coding. and it has a preview pane, so you can write your script and then interact with the telephone on the page, so you can at least see how it's going to work without ever having to deploy it anywhere. So that's a really great way you can get started, and nobody even has to see your very first attempt at it, because you don't actually have to put it live anywhere on the internet. And then another tool, another thing that I always recommend for journalists is, have you ever played with Twine, the game making? It's kind of like doing choose your own adventure game making stuff. But it's actually a really interesting, if you think you've got a story and looking at how people might navigate through that story through different ways. I just find it sometimes it's like a very useful kind of mind mapping way of looking at a story or an issue that you've got, and you can kind of work out how users might want to branch through it, or the flow of a story.
Excellent, thanks. And now we're on to your questions. So if you have questions for the panel, please just raise your hand and let us know. Sure.
So one quick question to all of you guys. I'm Mario from I'm loud enough. Okay, so
for the audience at home.
One quick question, and you guys don't have to answer if you don't want. But you talked about chatbots and the stuff that you're doing. How is that influencing your bottom line of the organization?
That is a very good question, and thanks to the church-state divide, I don't know and I don't care. No, that's a really good question. I think it's an issue for all of us that we are increasing across different platforms like Instant Articles and AMP. That kind of splinters your ad inventory. Certainly on chatbots, there doesn't seem to really be any monetization there at the moment. They've got a long history of being suggested that we should invest in new platforms that don't have monetization yet, but there will be some in the future. I think for that reason you need to be cautious about how much you invest in these things. I also think you do have to dip your toe in the water and discover it. But I mean, there's a reason we don't have a massive marketing campaign trying to get people onto our chatbot, because it's not a monetizable platform for us at the minute. So why would we drive people off our existing apps where we can at least monetize them in some way? So yeah, I think it's something that you have to take into consideration.
And this differs by the platform, but I think it's true that Facebook is planning to offer some more e-commerce sort of integration with its Messenger bot APIs. So coming from the fashion journalism world, like there are some obvious ways that we could potentially leverage a chatbot. If we're suggesting things that a person could wear, perhaps we could also offer them the chance to buy that outfit as well.
Hi.
Hello, hi, I'm Alexander Fanta. I'm a journalist and I'm currently researching automated journalism at the Reuters Institute in Oxford. And my question concerns, do you believe that in the nearer future, in the longer future, you will start to integrate large data sets for bot algorithms to draw on? And do you think, what role do you think data will play in developing future chatbots?
So I wrote a little bit about this yesterday, and I think your football example is a really interesting example, is that there are loads of tedious menial tasks that we currently do in the newsroom and consider to be part of the editorial workflow, and computers are really good at doing boring stuff very, very quickly, and they never complain about it. And so there are lots of areas, or I say lots of areas, but there are some areas, sport, stock markets, political opinion polls, where I feel like we shouldn't be that far from a computer being able to produce the first draft of an article, that because the computer is going to quite quickly spot that the most important trend here is this thing, or this is the biggest shift we've seen away from a particular political party since, in a particular demographic. Now, you might be completely on top of your beat and understand all those things at a glance, but I think that journalists will quite soon get used to the idea that, in the Premier League at the minute, Sunderland haven't scored a goal for 2 months, and the work of trying to work out when was the last time they went that long without scoring a goal. Well, actually, a computer that just had all the stats of all the games they've ever played would be able to do it like that. And that doesn't necessarily write you an article, but it might tell you that the last time they went this long without scoring a goal was in 1963, and you might think, actually, let's pick up the phone and see which squad members are still alive from that 1963 team. Can I find an interview with someone who went 2 months without scoring a goal? And so the computer hasn't written an article for you, but the computer has started providing leads. And I think when you talk about robot journalism or automated journalism, I think people worry about job losses. I can see the fear on people's faces, but I actually think that there's something between 0% using automation and 100% where computers are writing your op-eds for you. I think we're a long way from that, but there's something in between the 30-70, 70-30 thing where, you know, maybe the report that you do and publish every day about the movement of the Belgian stock market can basically be automated, and all you need to do is add a little bit of a flourish on top of it. And that's a thing that will bring efficiency in the newsroom and free you up to do more interesting work.
And I would just add that I think, you know, automated journalism has basically followed where the data is available. So if you look at the earliest algorithms that were able to generate text, it was in weather reporting. And these systems have been around for close to 50 years. Sports, finance, these are all domains where data is now not only available, but pretty high quality. Politics, depending, you know, on which jurisdiction you're in, the data is available and relatively high quality. So, you know, as we sort of march forward in time and more domains become datafied and quantified, I think we'll see the reach of automated journalism kind of move into those areas. But it's very much what Martin has described. It will be, it will get you part of the way there. Oftentimes it's not going to be the 100% solution. Except in very, very narrow, well-defined, well-engineered cases.
And I'd like to add that these are the fields where you can really easily choose which data sets you want to use. But there are other fields like in foreign reporting, in science, or where you have so many different data sets and you have to dig into the topic to decide or to be able to decide which data set you want to use. So there's more human work needed. And I think, weather is one example that could be done, I think, 90% automatically. This won't be a problem also for the reader. I think we have to first think about what they would expect from us. And in sports journalism, for example, they expect to hear the expert's voice and to really know what questions they would pose.
All right, we've got time for just one more question. Do you have another question in the room? Well, then I'll ask one. As far as the interaction, when you've created these types of interactives, you were talking about, Jackie, you were talking about the proposals of marriage coming in from users. Martin, you were talking about the idea of designing, you know, noting how real people will interact and, you know, keeping the perspective of the end user in mind. Have there been for the aspiring chatbot creators out there, is there a piece of advice that you'd give as far as interacting with real people and how real people use this kind of technology that you didn't know when you started, but you know now?
I mentioned earlier that you should aim to if you're building something yourself or working with another platform, you should look for something that's flexible or build something that's flexible and lets you pivot and respond. One thing I'd add on to that is something that a colleague in one of our other markets suggested to me, which is if the chatbot is not recognizing something, maybe you put a threshold on it so that, you know, if it's just like a one-time thing, you won't get notified. But have it set it up so that it either notifies you on Slack or sends you an email or whatever you'll actually see that you can then respond. Because, you know, having something that lets you, you know, change the way the bot responds is good, and that's part of the solution, I guess. But, you know, you have to know that there are things that the chatbot is not recognizing that people are saying. So I would say setting up a notification.
I think one question that maybe we haven't touched on enough, actually. But I suppose I don't think it's advice, but I think you just need to think a little bit also about the ethics and the ethical side of what you're doing, because I think when people are using messenger services with their friends, their expectation is that they're having a one-to-one conversation with their friend. I think they have that same expectation when they're having a conversation with a messenger bot, and they don't realize that there's a whole team of humans who can read the messages that are coming in. And sometimes, I'm not going to do it now because of time, but sometimes when I'm doing talks, I get the audience all to sign up for the Guardian chatbot, and then using my phone on stage, I can then go say, oh yeah, I can see you, you're wearing a blue top, because I've got all the messages that are coming into the Guardian Messenger bot on my phone because I'm an admin on the Facebook page. And so that is an interesting ethical position to be in. And you need to think about that, as I say, because the impression you get from people is that they feel they're having a private conversation with a sentient human being, and actually it's a mess of an algorithm with some humans looking at it, which is, and how you set that user expectation up, I don't know. That was a bit of a downbeat end, wasn't it?
But important questions to think about, and important questions that you all asked. So thanks very much, and thanks to the panel.
Rethinking and reinventing journalism in the digital age is something that's very exciting, something that's very challenging too.
Of the way that many of us consume our news every day. Everything from Google News to Facebook trends to trends on Twitter. A lot of our news consumption experience has been managed by these programs. And now news organizations are looking at ways to do even more targeted work and work that we manage ourselves using algorithms. And so we wanted to talk a bit about some experiences that we've had and then talk a little bit more about some of the questions that we've encountered and that one may encounter while working with programs and algorithms. And then we wanted to make sure that everyone here could leave with at least one cool tool from each member of the panel that you could try out yourselves if you wanted to bring algorithms into either your news gathering or your storytelling. And then finally, we wanted to take questions from you. And so we will make sure to leave time for that. But first, let's go ahead and talk a bit about some experiences we've had with algorithms. And we'll start with Martin and some of the work you guys at The Guardian have done with chatbots.
Yeah, so I've been working on chatbots for, I suppose, 6 months, 9 months. I think they're a really interesting development in the way that people interact with stories. I've been doing, I suppose, digital journalism for, I guess, nearly 2 decades now, which makes me feel very much an old hand at this. And along the way, I've worked on some things that became very important. So the first time you start saying, what does Facebook mean for a news organization? And that becomes
Good morning, and welcome to Collaborating with Algorithms. I see we have some folks that are coming in. Come on in, feel free to take a seat. We'll introduce ourselves and then we'll get going. My name is Greg Barber from the Washington Post, and I'll be your moderator today. And joining me,
I'm Martin Beelum. I'm from The Guardian in London. I'm our social and new formats editor.
I'm Nick Diakopoulos. I'm assistant professor at the University of Maryland, College Park. I study computational journalism, algorithmic accountability, automation in the news, and social computing.
My name is Christina Elmar. I'm from Spiegel Online in Hamburg, and I'm head of the data journalism team and also member of the editorial board.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Jackie Marr, and I'm at Condé Nast International, where I head up our interactive journalism efforts across 11 markets and multiple titles, including Vogue.
excellent. And we're here to talk about algorithms and how they can play into journalism. So algorithmic approaches are things that are being talked about a lot when it comes to pretty much everything in our lives these days, right? How computers have changed everything from the way that we light our homes to the way that we get our news. But on the news side of things, algorithms have been an important part of...
What do you suggest for dinner tonight? And it would just bring back some recipe suggestions. And how we first tested it actually was we didn't even build a bot. We just told some people that we'd built a bot and just to see what they would ask it. And then we had the developers, Wizard of Oz style, pretending to be robots to answer it so that we could kind of get an idea of what the script might be. And then now we... One of the most interesting things is that people really do chat to them as if they're living sentient beings, and the technology is nowhere near ready for that. So the experience can be quite unsatisfying, I think, if you're a user. And so then we made a second bot that basically, I think what news organizations often do is go, here's a new technology, here's the 500 articles a day that we're already publishing. How do we shove these articles through this new technology? And so we have a morning briefing bot, which you can subscribe to alerts, and it will basically message you on Facebook at 6 o'clock in the morning with here's a selection of the news, or here's the top stories today. And it acts like a push notification, and we feel that that kind of gives us a presence, a regular presence on someone's phone. We've built up a reasonably small subscriber base for it. We know that they open the messages a lot, but the click-through rate isn't high. But we suspect, my hunch is that basically people get the message, and you know most people in Europe asleep within a meter of their phone. So you're in bed and you pick it up, and it gives you a carousel of links, and you can kind of scroll and feel caught up for the day. You know that war hasn't broken out or whatever, and go about your daily business, and then maybe catch up with the news a bit later. And for a while we were also experimenting with writing those alerts specifically in the morning, which actually meant me having to get up at 5 o'clock every morning, which was something that's quite important. And I've also worked on some things that don't become very important. Google Wave springs to mind, and desktop widgets. And I think I would probably at the minute put chatbots in that latter category, that I don't really see a future where people are very desperate to use chatbots as a way of getting news. But I'm looking at the general trends in computing, and it strikes me at the moment, particularly if you look at how children use technology. So my 4-year-old son has worked out that he can press the green button on the remote control to get the next episode of the program that he's watching, because he's seen his sister do it. He's 4. But I can see it's not that far off that he ought to be able to just shout at the television, put Scooby-Doo on, and it will play it out loud, because that's not a hard phrase to parse, and the program is out there on demand. But I feel like with all these devices like Google Home and Alexa and the voice controlling your PlayStation, I genuinely don't think we're that far off just being able to shout at stuff in our houses. And I can envisage a situation where I'll come home and just casually shout, "What's the news?" or "Update me on the news." And so the question for an organisation like The Guardian is, what does your news look like in that context? And so the work we've done with our Alexa skill and with chatbots is an attempt to try and understand how we would have to present content in that space, and also how real people who don't work with computers and who don't work in the media will interact with these kinds of conversational interfaces. So a few things that have been fascinating about it. We've done 3 chatbots at The Guardian. The first one was a kind of recipes chatbot where you would say salad and it would bring back some salad recipes for you. Or you could just ask it, what shall I